Good evening. In the next unit, I would like to focus on the aspects of conceptualization, observation, and experiment. For the purpose of better understanding and learning, I would like to start with observation, then moving towards experiment, and then finally coming to the stage of conceptualization. It is also one of the methodology in doing science. For instance, if you are able to club this observation as well as experiment, and it leads to the fact production. Through the production of the fact, we will be able to theorize the event or set of an events. Okay, this is purely part of the methodology. This methodology is called as induction. The method of induction. Okay. In this class, I would like to focus only on observations and experiment and giving in one example out of this. Okay. And in the next class, I would like to able to look more on experimental design, the structure of experimentations as well as the conceptualizations. Okay. Before beginning this class, I would like to make two set of conditions. The first condition is that every experiment involves or requires series of observation. Okay, that means you cannot do experiment without observation. The second one is that every observation need not to follow the method of experiment, which means one can observe certain things without the method of experiment, without experiments. Okay, so always keep this in mind. Okay, every experiment involves a series of observations. That means whenever we do experiment, and observation is part of the experimentation process. The second one is that every observation need not to follow the method of experiment. So whenever we do observations, that it doesn't mean that we are exactly doing the experimentation process. Maybe we are just observing things just like that, or we are observing as it is, the way it is. So we are into the process of observations without following the method of experiment. From here, I'll be moving on to the idea of what is observation is. What does observation is? Observation is a tool to collect data. Okay, the first one. What does exactly the observation means is that an observer able to observe certain events that happens in front of him or her. Okay, so generally a kind of an observer is an individual who observes certain aspects which happens in front of him. Okay, he'll be able to observe as it happens. Observe as it happens, which means it is ongoing event. Which is an ongoing event, something which is happening in front of him or in front of her, and he or she will be able to observe it quietly. For example, if you would like to take it, during the time of lockdown, okay, at present, you will be able to observe that mere silence, just a complete silence you will be able to observe. Okay, number one, the silence. Number second is that the level of pollution is very less, because the movement of the vehicles are very few, and ultimately eventually you will be able to observe that the rate of the pollution is also very low. Okay, these are some of the observations we make in everyday life. So observation is that an individual observes certain things as it happens, as it is ongoing event. But there is something which we need to understand much more deeply than this. The first idea of observation is that observation is something which is very passive and also a private in nature. At the same time, observation is also very active and public in nature. The first idea is that how observation is passive as well as a kind of private in nature, because when observation happens, it's the individual who is trying to observe. It's more an individual process. It's an individual who is trying to observe certain situation, okay, or certain object, or even certain phenomena. Phenomena is nothing but an experience. Okay, so he is trying to observe certain things, what is happening outside of him. So that's the purely a kind of it's an individual act. It is an act of individual. At the same time, what guides this individual act of observation is that the perception. The perception which guides the act of observation. So here, how this perception, from where this perception comes from, or what factors influence the perception? There are three factors which influences the perception. Number one is that the theory. Okay. The second is that it's an expectations. What an observer is expecting from the process of observation. That's an expectation. Number third is that it's a life experiences. It's a life experiences. Always remember this, the perception is actually influenced by these three factors. The theory, the expectations, what the observer is expecting from the process of observations, and what is the life experience of a researcher. Okay, so the life experience always it will be a part of the observation process. Okay, and remember this three will guide to formulate the set of questions. I said it before observation. One should make certain questions. One should formulate certain questions. Those questions are a kind of an guiding principles or a tool to observe certain things. So these are the questions. How the questions comes and from where the question comes. These three factors influence the process of making questions. At the same time, remember this, these all are what we connect to the aspect of history of ideas. History of ideas. That other reason is that since it becomes a kind of an individual act, it becomes a kind of an private. I observe it and I keep it with myself. And as a researcher, we observe it and we keep it ourselves. We keep it within our minds. Okay, and then we don't even suppose if you don't convey the what you have observed to the others, then it means inherent. It means a kind of an within the minds of the individual itself. It doesn't play any role outside of the individual as well as in the society. Then when you move from a kind of the passive as well as to the private in nature towards an active and public in nature, what you are trying to do here is that it is not the only one researcher is trying to observe the situations. There are multiple individuals who is trying to observe the situation. So what is commonality? What is common here is that the situation becomes the common grounds. Situation is a common ground for each and every observer. Okay. So when it becomes a kind of an each and every one is being involved in the process of an observation, that means remember that there are multiple perceptions are involved. Multiple perceptions are involved in the act of observations. Okay. When the multiple perceptions are involved, that means the perception varies from individual to individual in terms of a theory, in terms of an expectations, in terms of a life experience. At the same time, what kind of a question the observer is asking, that also varies. So here the question is also vary, or the question also varies from individual to individual. Okay. The next step is that how it becomes a kind of the public act, and slowly we are moving into the act of a public is that validating what one has observed. That's trying to bring the idea of validating what one has observed during the field visit or during the process of experiment. Okay, so validating. So the validating here is that each one's perceptions, each one perception over an object will be validated. So the validating will come that it's a kind of a verification process. This verification process happens in collective. Observation is an individual act, verification is a collective process. Observation is an individual act, but the verification happens in public. So the public will tell that the collective that the group of scholars or the scientific community will verify that whatever you have observed, whether it is right or wrong, whether it is true or false, when you make that the statement, bringing the statement of a true or a false or a kind of a right or wrong, that means you are trying to look at, you're getting into the process of objectifying what you have observed. I just move it here. When you are trying to move this process of observation is a kind of an individual act, but verification happens in the public, that it exactly moves that you are trying to objectify has been observed through observation, through the process of observation. This is what we call it as a kind of an making invisible, invisible as visible. The entire idea of observation is connected to this process. Okay, that means trying to come up with an objectified fact. That's a very intention behind the, following or adopting the method of observations. Always remember that the observation is a kind of an open-ended tool. Okay, you go to the field and in front of you there are many things, many aspects which will be like ongoing. The researcher would like to note it down as it is, the way it comes to his mind. So he will be able to write it. He will be able to write or observe and observe. But unless you organize systematically, you organize the fact, organize the observation, you will not move to this particular stage. You cannot objectify the fact. Suppose I'll be able to collect as much as data, but I'm not able to organize, I'm not able to thematize what I have collected. That means whatever I have collected, okay, it's not going to give any result. It gives that means it gives no result for me as well as for the others. So always remember that it's a systematic organization. It's a systematic organization that's going to give the meaning for your data or the meaning for your fact. Okay, so keep that in mind that you have to do this systematic organizations of the data, but the systematic organization of the data will happen through what kind of questions you have asked. That means you are only trying to find answers through observation for your questions. So the observation helps you to arrive at particular answers. Okay, this is what a very a kind of the idea or the logic behind an observation. Okay, then I'll slowly move on to the very idea of what is experiment. What is experiment? Okay. Before understanding what is experiment, I would like to tell you that the logic of experiment, the logic of doing experiment The first is that the logic of experiment is that to test the hypothesis. To test the hypothesis. Number second is that to isolate the factors responsible for the production of certain phenomena. Number third is that it differentiate what is relevant fact. Differentiate what is relevant fact and what is irrelevant fact. There are three important aspects or the logic behind doing an experiment. The first is to test the hypothesis. So you have a kind of an unproved set of assumptions. You have it, whether you are trying to, through the experiment, you are trying to come up with the idea that, okay, whatever the assumptions I had, it's supposed to be true. Whatever the assumptions I had, maybe a kind of it's false. So on the other hand, if you look at it, how the experiment is going to help you is that to isolate the factors responsible for the production of certain phenomena. There might be multiple factors will be involved in the production of a certain phenomena, but you're only trying to look at which important factors contributes to the production of a phenomena. So you will be able to isolate the unnecessary factors in the process of production of a phenomena. And the third aspect is that it also differentiate what is relevant fact, what is irrelevant fact. You might be able to collect too many facts through observations, but it's only the experiment will tell you that what is relevant fact. So this is where we differentiate the tools of observations as well as the tools of experimentations. The tools of observation doesn't help you to test the hypothesis. Number one, it will not tell you that which factor is responsible for the production of certain phenomena. Number third process is that you are only able to collect all the necessary facts, but you're not going to share that through observations. You will not be able to surely tell that this is a relevant fact which is important in explaining certain object, in explaining certain situations. So the observation as a tool has its own limitations. Okay, when you come to the idea, when you look at this idea of experiment, that means you are slowly moving to the understanding of what is experiment. The experiment is it's a causal explanation. Is a causal explanation of some event or for certain phenomenon that happens. In reality. So it provides, what experiment exactly provides is that it provides the causal explanations for some of the events which is happening in the society, or it may be a kind of a certain phenomenon that happens in reality. Okay, so here the next idea is that what is a causal explanations? What is cause here? What do we mean by the cause? What is the very idea of the cause? The cause is nothing but a reason. You are identifying the reason for certain. For instance, you are trying to identifying as a reason for certain behaviors, certain behavior of a person or attitude of a particular person Okay, so you're only trying to identify the reason. Suppose a person is like trying to behave in very erratic ways. Okay, then you will be like able to reason it out that what is the reason behind the erratic behaviors. What is the reason behind the kind of an arrogant attitudes. So suppose if the behavior is very pleasant, if the behavior is very good, okay, and then you'll be able to tell that okay, there is the reason behind it, there is a reason behind it. So the cause is that the reason, so you have to tell that the reason for so on and so forth, for instance for a behavior, for an attitude, for any of the for instance, I can also give a kind of a good example is that the present ongoing event is that, and the present situation is that you will be able to observe very mere complete silence. So the silence is because of you will not able to see any like kind of an vehicular movement in a nearby your locality. Okay, that's the reason is that the lockdown is the pure reason. The lockdown is the pure reason, but actually it's the lockdown is maybe a kind of a reason, but actual reason is that to stop the spread of diseases. To stop the spread of diseases, the government has like tried to introduce a kind of an curfew into the society, or lockdown, forced lockdown, so that the spread of disease will be stopped. So because of which you are able to see the complete silence in your locality. Okay, so the reason you have to identify completely. If you put it the reason in terms of another way is that for instance how the day and night happens. Suppose the day and night happens because of, for instance, the earth rotates by itself and the sun is stationary. So what is the cause is that these two are the cause for this effect. So the causal explanation is about, you will be able to tell that what is cause, what is the reason for certain effect that happens in a situation, or even it certain effects that happens within a certain object. So what you are trying to identify here is that there are two different things you are able to segregate. One of the major thing is that you are able to look at two different things. Okay, for instance, this is what we call it as independent variable. The other one is dependent variable. Independent variable is the cause, which explains the cause or the reason. On the other hand, dependent variable will tell about the effect. Will tell about the effect that happens because of the cause. Okay, so the independent and dependent variable, whenever we do experiment, so always we are attempting to look for what is independent variable, what is dependent variable in understanding certain object. Okay, so the primary idea behind doing an experiment, or the logic of experiment, is to test these variables, independent variable as well as the dependent variables. For instance, I would like to give a kind of another example is that you are in the projects. in the projects you're trying to like propose various technological ideas, then you're trying to say that these technological ideas may bring a kind of the positive outcome or eventual outcome in the village development process. You have to tell that you clearly specify that how your ideas, how your technological ideas would bring a positive change in the development of the village. That means here the technological ideas are you're trying to introduce as a kind of an independent variable, but at the same time what you want to eventually like look at a kind of an as an outcome is that the positive impact, that's the development of the village. Suppose if you're not going to explain, if you're not able to explain that these all of the technological ideas which I have with me, and these technological ideas would help the positive would able to like bring a positive change. If you're not able to explain this, that means you're not trying to look at the causal explanations. Causal explanation means there is no logic of reasons to believe your claims, to believe your inferences. That means your study becomes a kind of an completely partial or kind of an incomplete in nature. Okay, so you always keep this in mind. I'm just moving to the second idea of how to establish this causal link. How to establish the causal link? What caused what? You can put it the other way around: is what caused what? There are 5 criteria to decide this. The first is that it is an association. First criteria is that it's an associations. The associations between 2 different variables. Okay. If there is a change in one variable, will also bring change in the other variables. Okay. For instance, smoking. Increase in smoking may lead to increase in the rate of cancer, and it's also the vice versa. Decrease in the level of smoking will also result in the reduction of cancer. Okay, so what is happening here is that one variable influences the other variable. So it's a kind of an associations you are trying to look at it. And at the same time, I'll be coming up with a kind of a good example of the coronavirus case, and then I'll be explaining that how one can look at these factors in a totality. Okay, the second one is that it is temporal. The temporal is about a kind of the time factor. Time factor which explains what comes first. What comes first? Okay. Always I remember that, for instance, good example of this one is that trying to look at kind of first the virus originate, and then the disease occurs. So the virus is kind of an independent variable. The disease is supposed to be the dependent variable. That's first the origin. You have to always try to look at that which one originates first, which one comes first. Okay, so that's a more you're trying to look at a kind of a causal link in terms of a time factor. The third one is that spurious. The spurious as well as the non-spurious. Okay. First is that the non-spurious is that there is no third variable in non-spurious. No third variable that influence the other two variables. Okay, that means you will be able to see only the two variables which plays a very crucial role in production of a phenomena. For instance, the origin of the virus which leads to the disease. So what here happens is that the virus is the cause for the disease. Okay, but that is, you are not able to identify, you are not able to tell that there might be a kind of the third variable which will be involved in that the virus which leads to the spread of which leads to the production of the disease. If suppose if there is a kind of a third variable which is intervening, then you will be able to tell that maybe a kind of another reason which you could able to identify for the production of the disease. That's what we call it as the spurious the spurious factor. Then the fourth one is that you will be able to look at that mechanism. The mechanism which explains the process. The process through which one variable influences the other variable. The process through which one variable influence the other variable. So you are trying to hear from, for instance, you are trying to look at that different set of a process which is being involved. For instance, I look at the same example of a kind of an the virus disease. Suppose I want to look at that the connection between the virus and disease and how the disease spreads. So I'll be able to look at, for instance, what are the factors which contributes to the spread of the disease. Is that maybe a communications and closed interactions. The second the factors I would like to tell that maybe a kind of an unhygienic positions. And third factors I would like to tell that maybe there is no like a kind of an effective drug or a vaccine that is prevalent in the society that could stop the spread of the disease. So I'll be able to look at the different set of process which is being involved in influencing the two set of variables. Okay, and the fifth one is that it is also trying to understand the context in totality. The context or the social conditions. Context or the social conditions that influence the two variables. How these two variables play a crucial role within a given social conditions. For instance, you will be able to see that the same the virus and the disease in the given global situations. For instance, the global situation is that the virus has originated at one place, and slowly through the process of globalization, it started spreading from one. For instance, it started in the Wuhan and it started spread to throughout different parts of the country. When it's moved slowly to the different parts of the country, and each country tried to look at their strategies to control this spread of the virus. For instance, the Indian in the India's the lockdown, okay, the India strategy on locking down the country for the next 21 days is purely an experimental process. It's purely an experimental process that could that all believe that that will give a kind of good results in trying to suppressing the spread of the disease, but the thing is that it may be a kind of, it may result in a it may produce a kind of a positive or good results given certain conditions. For instance, we have to be within the home, stay home, okay, but we are not able to lock down all the people within the country. Okay, so for instance, in the case of an migrant employees or informal sectors where the people they don't have a kind of an everyday employment opportunities, they start moving towards their native places. So what happens is that it's completely like nullifying the point of lockdown. Nullifying the point of lockdown. That means the two variables, that the virus and the spread of disease, controlling the spread of diseases will be